History 10, Chapter 6, Section 2, starting on page 195, The Enlightenment in Europe. The main idea for this section is power and authority. A revolution in intellectual activity changed Europeans' view of government and society. Why it matters now. The various freedoms enjoyed in many countries today are a result of Enlightenment thinking. Terms and names for this section: Enlightenment, social contract, John Locke, philosophe, Voltaire, Montesquieu, Rousseau, Mary Wollstonecraft. Setting the stage. In the wake of the scientific revolution and the new ways of thinking it prompted, scholars and philosophers began to reevaluate old notions about other aspects of society. They sought new insights into the underlying beliefs regarding government, religion, economics, and education. Their efforts spurred the Enlightenment, a new intellectual movement that stressed reason and thought and the power of individuals to solve problems. Known also as the Age of Reason, the movement reached its height in the mid-1700s and brought great change to many aspects of Western civilization. Two views on government. The Enlightenment started from some key ideas put forth by two English political thinkers of the 1600s, Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. Both men experienced the political turmoil of England early in that century. However, they came to very different conclusions about the government and human nature. Hobbes' social contract. Thomas Hobbes expressed his views in a work called The Leviathan, published in 1651. The horrors of the English Civil War convinced him that all humans were naturally selfish and wicked. Without governments to keep order, Hobbes said, there would be, quote, war of every man against every man, and life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Hobbes argued that to escape such a bleak life, people had to hand over their rights to a strong ruler. In exchange, they gained law and order. Hobbes called this agreement by which people created a government the social contract. Because people acted in their own self-interest, Hobbes said, the ruler needed total power to keep citizens under control. The best government was one that had the awesome power of a leviathan, a sea monster. In Hobbes's view, such a government was an absolute monarchy, which would impose order and demand obedience. Changing ideas, the right to govern. Old idea, a monarch's rule is justified by divine right. Divine means from God. New idea, a government's power comes from the consent of the governed, the people. Changing pages, we are now on page 196 at the top. Locke's natural rights. The philosopher John Locke held a different, more positive view of human nature. He believed that people could learn from experience and improve themselves. As reasonable beings, they had the natural ability to govern their own affairs and to look after the welfare of society. Locke criticized absolute monarchy and favored the idea of self-government. According to Locke, all people are born free and equal with three natural rights: life, liberty, and property. The purpose of government, said Locke, is to protect these rights. If a government fails to do so, citizens have a right to overthrow it. Locke's theory has a deep influence on modern political thinking. His belief is that a government's power comes from the consent of the people. It is the foundation of modern democracy. The ideas of government by popular consent and the right to rebel against unjust rulers helped inspire struggles for liberty in Europe and the Americas. Next section, the philosophes advocate reason. The Enlightenment reached its height in France in the mid-1700s. Paris became the meeting place for people who wanted to discuss politics and ideas. The social critics of this period in France were known as philosophes, the French word for philosophers. The philosophes believed that people could apply reason to all aspects of life, just as Isaac Newton had applied reason to science. 5 concepts form the core of their beliefs. Reason. Enlightenment thinkers believed truth could be discovered through reason or logical thinking. Nature. The philosophes believed that what was natural was also good and reasonable. Happiness. The philosophers rejected the medieval notion that people should find joy in the hereafter and urged people to seek well-being on earth. Progress. The philosophers stressed that society and humankind could improve. And liberty. The philosophers called for liberties that the English people had won in their glorious revolution and the Bill of Rights. Voltaire combats intolerance. Probably the most brilliant and influential of the philosophers was François-Marie Arouet. Using the pen name Voltaire, he published more than 70 books of political essays, philosophy, and drama. Voltaire often used satire against his opponents. He made frequent targets of the clergy, the aristocracy, and the government. His sharp tongue made him enemies of the French court, and twice he was sent to prison. After his second jail term, Voltaire was exiled to England for more than 2 years. Although he made powerful enemies, Voltaire never stopped fighting for tolerance, reason, freedom of religious beliefs, and freedom of speech. He used his quill pen as if it were a deadly weapon in the thinker's war against humanity's worst enemies, intolerance, prejudice, and superstition. He summed up his staunch defense of liberty in one of his most famous quotes: "I do not agree with a word you say, but will defend to the death your right to say it." Just to the left of this is a little pop-out box. At the top it says History Makers and has a picture of Voltaire. He lived from 1694 to 1778. Voltaire befriended several European monarchs and nobles. Among them was the Prussian king Frederick II. The two men seemed like ideal companions. Both were witty and preferred to dress in shabby, rumpled clothes. Their relationship, 310, Chapter 6, Section 2, second part. My camera stopped filming, so hopefully we'll go all the way through this time. We're starting on page 196 in the pop-out box on the left side. At the top it says History Makers. Voltaire, 1694 to 1778. Voltaire befriended several European monarchs and nobles. Among them was the Prussian king Frederick II. The two men seemed like ideal companions. Both were witty and preferred to dress in shabby, rumpled clothes. Their relationship eventually soured, however. Voltaire disliked editing Frederick's mediocre poetry, while Frederick suspected Voltaire of shady business dealings. Voltaire eventually described the Prussian king as a nasty monkey, perfidious friend, and wretched poet. Frederick in turn called Voltaire a miser, dirty rogue, and coward. Page 197 at the top. Montesquieu and the Separation of Powers. Another influential French writer, the Baron de Montesquieu, devoted himself to the study of political liberty. Montesquieu believed that Britain was the best governed and most politically balanced country of his own day. The British king and his ministers held executive power. They carried out the laws of the state. The members of Parliament held legislative power. They made the laws. The judges of the English courts held judicial power. They interpreted the laws to see how it applied to a specific case. Montesquieu called this division of power among different branches separation of powers. Montesquieu oversimplified the British system. It did not actually separate the powers this way. His idea, however, became a part of his most famous book, On the Spirit of Laws, published in 1748. In this book, Montesquieu proposed that that separation of powers would keep any individual or group from gaining total control of the government. Power, he wrote, should be in check to power. This idea would later be called checks and balances. Montesquieu's book was admired by political leaders in the British colonies of North America. His ideas about separation of powers and checks and balances became the basis for the United States Constitution. Rousseau, champion of freedom. A third great philosopher, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, was passionately committed to individual freedom. The son of a poor Swiss watchmaker, Rousseau won recognition as a writer of essays. A strange, brilliant, and controversial figure, Rousseau strongly disagreed with other Enlightenment thinkers on many matters. We're now on page 198. Most philosophers believed that reason, science, and art would improve life for all people. Rousseau, however, argued that civilization corrupted people's natural goodness. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains, he wrote. Rousseau believed that the only good government was one that was freely formed by the people and guided by the general will of society, a direct democracy. Under such a government, people agreed to give up some of their freedom in favor of the common good. In 1762, he explained his political philosophy in a book called The Social Contract. Rousseau's view of the social contract differed greatly from that of Hobbes. For Hobbes, the social contract was an agreement between a society and its government. For Rousseau, it was an agreement among free individuals to create a society and a government. Like Locke, Rousseau argued that legitimate government came from the consent of the governed. However, Rousseau believed in a much broader democracy than Locke had promoted. He argued that all people were equal and that titles of nobility should be abolished. Rousseau's idea inspired many of the leaders of the French Revolution who overthrew the monarchy in 1789. We're going to go back one page, back to 197, to the box at the bottom. One of the quotes is by Rousseau, who we just learned about, and the other one is by Montesquieu, who we just finished reading about. Analyzing primary sources. Laws promote freedom. Both Montesquieu and Rousseau believed firmly that fair and just laws, not monarchs or unrestrained mobs, should govern society. Here, Rousseau argues that laws established by and for the people are a hallmark of a free society. Primary source. I, therefore, give the name republic to every state that is governed by laws, no matter what the form of its administration may be. For only in such a case does the public interest govern and the res publica rank as a reality. Laws are, properly speaking, only the conditions of civil association. The people, being subject to the laws, ought to be their author. The conditions of the society ought to be regulated by those who come together to form it. That's by Jean-Jacques Rousseau from The Social Contract. Laws ensure security. While laws work to promote citizens from abusive rulers, Montesquieu argues that they also guard against anarchy and mob rule. This is the primary source. It is true that in democracies the people seem to act as they please, but political liberty does not consist in an unlimited freedom. We must have continually present to our minds the difference between independence and liberty. Liberty is a right of doing whatever the laws permit, and if a citizen could do what they, the laws, forbid, he would be no longer possessed of liberty, because all his fellow citizens would have the same power. And that one is by Baron de Montesquieu, which he wrote in The Spirit of Laws. The document-based questions for these two primary documents are, the first one is analyzing issues. Why should citizens be the authors of society's laws, according to Rousseau? And number two, making inferences. Why does Montesquieu believe that disobeying laws leads to a loss of liberty? Moving forward to page 198. Beccaria, I don't know how to pronounce that. Beccaria promotes criminal justice. An Italian philosopher named Cesare Bonassana Beccaria turned his thoughts to the justice system. He believed that laws existed to preserve social order, not to avenge crimes. Beccaria regularly criticized common abuses of justice. They included torture of witnesses and suspects, irregular proceedings and trials, and punishments that were arbitrary or cruel. He argued that a person accused of a crime should receive a speedy trial and that torture should never be used. Moreover, he said that the degree of punishment should be based on the seriousness of the crime. He also believed that capital punishment, where you kill somebody, the government kills somebody, should be abolished, should be done with, that they should not do capital punishment. Beccaria based his ideas about justice on the principle that governments should seek the greatest good for the greatest number of people. His ideas influenced criminal law reformers in Europe and North America. Major ideas of the Enlightenment. Idea of natural rights, life, liberty, and property. The thinker from that is Locke. And the impact that that had on society is fundamental to U.S. Declaration of Independence. Next idea, separation of powers. The thinker is Montesquieu, and the impact is France, United States, and Latin American nations use separation of powers in new constitutions. Next idea, freedom of thought and expression. The thinker is Voltaire. Guaranteed in U.S. Bill of Rights and French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. European monarchs reduce or eliminate censorship. Next idea, abolishment of torture, doing away with torture. Vicaria. It's guaranteed in U.S. Bill of Rights. Torture is outlawed or reduced in nations of Europe and the Americas. Next idea, religious freedom. Voltaire. Guaranteed in U.S. Bill of Rights and French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. European monarchs reduce persecution. This is separation of church and state. The next one is women's equality. And the thinker for that, actually we're going to read about next, is Mary Wollstonecraft, who is also Mary Shelley and wrote Frankenstein. The impact of that is women's rights groups form in Europe and North America. Moving on to women and the Enlightenment. Let's read the pop-out box on the right first. History makers. Mary Wollstonecraft lived from 1759 to 1797. A strong advocate of education for women, Wollstonecraft herself received little formal schooling. She and her two sisters taught themselves by studying books at home. With her sisters, she briefly ran a school. These experiences shaped much of her thoughts about education. Wollstonecraft eventually took a job with a London publisher. There, she met many leading radicals of the day. One of them was her future husband, the writer William Goldwyn. Wollstonecraft died at the age of 38 after giving birth to their daughter, Mary. This child, whose married name was Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, went on to write the classic novel Frankenstein. I was wrong, it's her daughter that wrote Frankenstein. All right, at the top, page 199, Women and the Enlightenment. The philosophers challenged many assumptions about government and society, but they often took a traditional view towards women. Rousseau, for example, developed many progressive ideas about education. However, he believed that a girl's education should mainly teach her how to be a helpful wife and mother. Other male social critics scolded women for reading novels because they thought it encouraged idleness and wickedness. Still, some male writers argued for more education for women and for women's equality in marriage. Women writers also tried to improve the status of women. In 1694, the English writer Mary Astell published A Serious Proposal to the Ladies. Her book addressed the lack of educational opportunities for women. In later writings, she used Enlightenment arguments about government to criticize the unequal relationship between men and women in marriage. She wrote, "If absolute sovereignty be not necessary in a state, how comes it to be so in a family? If all men are born free, how is it that all women are born slaves?" During the 1700s, other women picked up these themes. Among the most persuasive was Mary Wollstonecraft, who published an essay called A Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792. In the essay, she disagreed with Rousseau that women's education should be secondary to men's. Rather, she argued that women, like men, need education to become virtuous and useful. Wollstonecraft urged women to enter the male-dominated fields of medicine and politics. Women made important contributions to the Enlightenment in other ways. In Paris and other European cities, wealthy women helped spread Enlightenment ideas through social gatherings called salons, which you will read about later in this chapter. One woman fortunate enough to receive an education in the sciences was Emily de Châtelet, French. Du Châtelet was an aristocrat trained as a mathematician and physicist. By translating Newton's work from Latin into French, she helped stimulate an interest in science in France. Legacy of the Enlightenment. Over a span of a few decades, Enlightenment writers challenged long-held ideas about society. They examined such principles as the divine right of monarchs, the union of church and state, and the existence of unequal social classes. They held these beliefs up to the light of reason and found them in need of reform. The philosophers mainly lived in the world of ideas. They formed and popularized new theories, although they encouraged reform. Sorry, this is my cat. Where was I? Although they encouraged reform, they were not active revolutionaries. However, their theories eventually inspired the American and French revolutions and other revolutionary movements of the 1800s. Enlightenment thinkers produced 3 other long-term effects that helped shape Western civilization. 1. Belief in progress. The first effect was a belief in progress. Pioneers such as Galileo and Newton had discovered the key for unlocking the mysteries of nature in the 1500s and 1600s. With the door thus opened, the growth of scientific knowledge, turning the page, the growth of scientific knowledge seemed to quicken in the 1700s. We're now on page 200. Scientists made key new discoveries in chemistry, physics, biology, and mechanics. The success of this... Sorry, I lost my page. The success of the scientific revolution gave people the confidence that human reason could solve social problems. Philosophers and reformers urged an end to the practice of slavery and argued for greater social equality, as well as a more democratic style of government. A more secular outlook. A second outcome was the rise of a more secular or non-religious outlook. During the Enlightenment, people began to question openly their religious beliefs and the teachings of the Church. Before the scientific revolution, people accepted the mysteries of the universe as the workings of God. One by one, scientists discovered that these mysteries could be explained mathematically. Newton himself was a deeply religious man, and he sought to reveal God's majesty through his work. However, his findings often caused people to change the way they thought about God. Meanwhile, Voltaire and other critics attacked some of the beliefs and practices of organized Christianity. They wanted to rid religious faith of superstition and fear and promote tolerance of all religions. Importance of the individual. Faith in science and in progress produced a third outcome, the rise of individualism. As people began to turn away from the church and royalty for guidance, they looked to themselves instead. The philosophers encouraged people to use their own ability to reason in order to judge what was right or wrong. They also emphasized the importance of the individual in society. Government, they argued, was formed by individuals to promote their welfare. The British thinker Adam Smith extended the emphasis on the individual to economic thinking. He believed that individuals acting in their own self-interest created economic progress. Smith's theory is discussed in detail in Chapter 9. During the Enlightenment, reason took center stage. The greatest minds of Europe followed each other's work with interest and often met to discuss their ideas. Some of the kings and queens of Europe were also very interested. As you will learn in Section 3, they sought to apply some of the philosophers' ideas to create progress in their countries. End of Section 2. Again, the terms for Section 2 were Enlightenment, Social Contract, John Locke, Philosophe, Voltaire, Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Mary Wollstonecraft. Using your notes. If you took notes, this is a question you might be able to answer. Which impact of the Enlightenment do you consider most important? And a question about main ideas. What are the natural rights with which people are born, according to John Locke? Next one. Who were the philosophers and what did they advocate? And next, what was the legacy of the Enlightenment? Critical thinking and writing questions. Synthesizing. Explain how the following statement reflects the Enlightenment ideas. Power should be a check to power. Analyzing issues. Why might some women have been critical of the Enlightenment? Drawing conclusions. Do you think the philosophers were optimistic about the future of mankind? Explain. Writing activity. Compare the views of Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau on government, then write one paragraph about how their ideas reflect the understanding of human behavior. Next up, different perspectives. European values during the Enlightenment. Writers and artists of the Enlightenment often used satire to comment on European values. Using wit and humor, they ridiculed various ideas and customs. Satire allowed artists to explore human faults in a way that is powerful but not preachy. In the 2 literary excerpts in the painting below, notice how the writer or artist makes his points. Primary source, Voltaire. Voltaire wrote Candide in 1759 to attack a philosophy called optimism, which held that all is right in the world. The hero of the story, a young man named Candide, encounters the most awful disasters and human evils. In this passage, Candide meets a slave in South America who explains why he was missing a leg and a hand. So this is the quote. When we're working at the sugar mill and catch our finger in the grinding wheel, they cut off our hand. When we try to run away, they cut off a leg. I have been in both these situations. This is the price you pay for the sugar you eat in Europe. The Dutch fetishists, i.e. missionaries, who converted me to Christianity tell me every Sunday that we are all the sons of Adam, whites and blacks alike. I'm no genealogist, but if these preachers are right, we're all cousins born of first cousins. Well, you will grant me that you can't treat a relative much worse than this. The next primary source is from Jonathan Swift, who wrote Gulliver's Travels. The narrator of Gulliver's Travels, 1726, is an English doctor named Lemuel Gulliver. Takes 4 disastrous voyages that leave him stranded in strange lands. In the following passage, Gulliver tries to win points with the king of Brobdingnag, a made-up land of giants, by offering to show him how to make guns and cannons. And this is the quote. The king was struck with the horror at the description I had given of those terrible engines. He was amazed how so impotent and groveling an insect as I, these were his expressions, would entertain such inhuman ideas, and in so familiar a manner as to appear wholly unmoved at all the scenes of blood and desolation which I had painted as the common effects of those destructive machines, whereof he said some evil genius, enemy to mankind, must have been the first contriver or inventor. And here's a painting. This painting is by William Hogarth. The English artist William Hogarth used satire in his paintings. In this painting, Canvassing for Votes, he comments on political corruption. While the candidate flirts with the ladies on the balcony, his supporters offer a man money for his vote. Document-based questions. 1. What is the main point that Voltaire is making in source A? What techniques does he use to reinforce his message? That was the one about the slave. Number 2. What does the king's reaction in source B say about Swift's view of Europe's military technology? So what does the giant king think about Europe using guns? And number 3, why might Hogarth's painting in source C be difficult for modern audiences to understand? What does this take away from his message? So how is society different now than it was then, and why might we not get what's going on in the picture? This is officially the end of section 2. Next we will be reading section 3, The Enlightenment Spreads.